Hello, namaste. Welcome to Dave's Hammer Show. Dave's Hammer Show is weekly English talk show on Indigenous TV and ITV Nepal. This talk show features online and in-person interviews of guests from different backgrounds. We discuss on issues impacting Indigenous peoples worldwide. We bring the lessons learned from Indigenous peoples across the globe and try to foster collaboration between the communities. Today I have a very special guest from Colombia. His name is Lorenzo Vargas, and he is the program manager of one of the pioneer organizations based in globally. It has a presence globally, specialized working in communication rights. So let me first welcome to Lorenzo to my show. Welcome, Lorenzo.
Thank you, Devon. Very happy to be here.
So to start with our conversations, as I said in background, you are the program manager of the WACC Global. Just could you tell what is this WACC Global all about and introduce yourself relating with your, indigenous background and so forth.
Okay. So namaste to you and to everybody here at Indigenous Television. We're extremely happy to be here to be partnering with your organization that we think it's actually one of the most impressive and organized indigenous media groups that WACC has worked with. I'll tell you a little bit about WACC. So WACC, or WACC, is an international NGO that focuses on communication rights. And what are communication rights? These are the rights to be seen, to be heard in the media, but also to be taken seriously. It's not enough to speak. Who cares if you have no platform or no one to listen to you? But it's to make sure that these voices are heard and taken seriously in decision-making spaces. So we're an international association. We work in some 30 countries every year, and there's some 5 priorities, one of which is indigenous rights, the indigenous communication rights.
So WACC, as a global organization, partnering with Cultural Survival as well, you have been working together to reach out or support the indigenous-led community radios, as you said, across the 30 different countries, right? Why do you actually prioritize the indigenous-led community radios or indigenous-led communication network or channels?
Well, there's many reasons. The first one is that WACC has a commitment to working with communities that have been historically silenced. That have, everybody has a voice, but they have not have a public voice, just a private voice in their communities, but public voice at the national level. So our commitment as an organization is to work with communities like that. And unfortunately, because of the colonial system that we live in, it's often indigenous people who are the ones who don't have access to media, information, communication. You were telling me here in Nepal, there's so many languages, but there's discrimination towards indigenous languages and indigenous communities. And these people are not heard on the national stage, and therefore their agendas, their concerns, their dreams, their solutions are not in the public debate. So WACC's commitment is to work with communities and people who have many things to share but have been silenced. And one of those communities are indigenous people who, by the way, are also playing an important role in climate, the protection of the environment.
As you've said, let me reiterate. In Nepal, we have roughly about 12,000 media houses, including newspaper, radio, television, including online. Out of which the means, let's say, the medium of language production is the Nepali or English. So there are a few lately. The indigenous peoples made their own effort to produce radio programs or TV programs in their own languages. So as you rightly said, as you have been working across 30 different countries, as you said, is the situations same like in Nepal that indigenous peoples are focusing, or why this communication right is very important for these marginalized communities? Why is it so?
Yeah, the situation is different in each context, but there's one commonality, and the commonality is that it's when indigenous people are organized and they work together, then they're able to make a change. When there's lack of organization or divisions, then it becomes quite difficult. And in our experience, media has been essential in helping communities to become better organized, because media provides a common platform, and people can be seen, can see themselves in the content, in the radio content, in the television content, now in digital content. So it's important because these communities begin to realize that, yeah, we have been silenced, but we have rights. We have the right to be heard. We have the right to express our views. We have the right to information. We have right to work with other communities, freedom of assembly, freedom of association. So these are essential rights that have been denied. And through media, these communities have the opportunity to realize that they have these rights and organize to fight for them.
I would like to relate to your own country. You are from Colombia,
Mhm.
so I guess if I'm not mistaken, I had an opportunity to visit Colombia, I guess in 2018 or 19. I met with the communities and indigenous community reserved area. They actually use the coca. I forgot that indigenous community too. And they actually face similar instances, similar problems that we indigenous peoples face, especially in relation with the mining, gold mining in the Colombia. Could you just tell us, your observations as indigenous peoples struggle in Colombia, and when you travel in other countries, you have worked a lot in Amazon areas too. Could you just relate your own country, Amazon, and this part of Asia?
Yeah, it's
How
actually,
communities?
so because of my work at Colombia, Brazil, Ecuador, Bolivia, so many countries, Mexico, Guatemala, so many countries in Latin America, Argentina, that where indigenous people play an important role. The issue is that many of these economies are affected by what we call extractivism. So they're economies that are not based on producing goods, but rather extracting things from the earth to sell them to the north. So basically, whether it's gold, whether it's copper, whether it's lithium, or whether it's industrial agriculture, it's all about extracting from Mother Earth. And the sad part of this is that in the process, the environment gets absolutely destroyed. I have had the opportunity to visit communities fighting to protect rivers, because when you have mining, for example, especially if it's illegal mining or mining that's not done properly, you dump mercury into the water and then the fish die, the economy is affected, and after 10 years there's no more gold. So these are false solutions. They're not, it's just an illusion of progress, and we're going to get richer, we're going to have gold, and going to have minerals. But for indigenous communities, that's not where life is. Life is in the river, life is in the forests, life is in the community, and mining and extractive industries often destroy this.
True that you brought this issues that even the statistics says that 80%, though there is a false data of 80% of the land or territory of indigenous peoples, where 80% of this biodiversity which is protected by indigenous peoples, though this is the false data, but majority of this biodiversity which are protected by the indigenous peoples, as the even data actually shows that. As you rightly said, and you are also you also have expertise in working on indigenous, the climate change, related with the climate change. What is your observation actually? To what extent indigenous peoples are living in the forest or nearby the river, balancing with the nature? Have you observed anything that the indigenous knowledge, indigenous living practices contributing to the adaptation of climate change? What is your observations from far actually?
And it's good that you bring this up, because right now it's the biodiversity COP that actually is meeting in Colombia. So it's the global UN conference on biodiversity. And it's true, in many parts of the world, indigenous people are the ones that are protecting biodiversity, right? Because indigenous people have specific rights to land and to their territories. In some countries has been granted, in some other countries you're still fighting for it. But because they're on their territories and they have a special relationship with the land, that is rooted in the idea that you're not just taking from the land, but this is a relationship. You're in a relationship with the land, that you're part of the land, you're part of the territory. Of course, not all indigenous people are the same, and they don't all practice have the same practices. And of course, there's some indigenous communities that engage in extractivism. Of course, we are all people. But the philosophy of indigenous peoples in many parts of the world is absolutely essential to protect nature and to protect the environment at a moment of climate and environmental crisis.
So, in background, just you were telling me one statement that really touched me. That you were just telling me that there is no climate justice without the communication justice, right? And that statement really touched me. How do you think that, when there is a discussion related with biodiversity or climate change, there also should be discussion on the communication right or communication justice as well, or that is true, more true for the indigenous peoples? Could you just elaborate that statement once again?
It's a statement that we think captures a double injustice. So first you have climate injustice, right? The majority of the emissions in the atmosphere have been caused by the global north and the industrialized countries. So the United States, China, the European countries. But the impact of climate change is really being felt by communities in the south, like Colombia, like Nepal. So that's the first injustice, climate injustice. But it also happens that communities, like indigenous communities in Nepal, for example, face communication injustice. They're excluded from media, they have limited access to the internet, there's stereotypes about their work, there's discrimination, so there's communication injustice. But actually, we think that the solutions to climate change, the solutions to biodiversity loss, are often with indigenous communities, with local communities. I don't think they're in the hands of big corporations. I think they're actually at the local level. And unless those voices from indigenous communities are heard, and unless indigenous communities have the tools, the resources, the money, the technology to express their voice and put those voices at the center of the conversation, we cannot address the climate solution, because the climate crisis, because at the heart of the climate crisis is a philosophical issue, is one of taking from nature, thinking that we can grow eternally, instead of thinking of a different philosophy, like the indigenous philosophy.
You rightly say it about when there is a discussion about the climate change in Nepal, indigenous peoples or local communities are projected as the vulnerable groups, or those are the one who are most impacted one. But coming from indigenous background, our communities, our elder, what we have seen is they are like expert in adaptation plan.
Exactly.
So we see a kind of the ideas that they actually imply or in practice are addressing any kind of this natural disaster as well. So there is also discussion around the world that indigenous peoples should be treated as an expert, not only as impacted or vulnerable communities too.
Exactly.
So since you are on the international level, following the sessions that is related with this climate change, to what extent do you hear actually this perspective of indigenous peoples being they should be treated as an expert, and they have to be included in decision making and discussion?
Yeah, I agree fully. The problem is that one thing is what people say, and something else what people do. So all these organizations internationally are saying indigenous knowledge, indigenous elders, they're experts. So it's easy to say, but when it comes to the practice, to integrate that knowledge into policy, there's many issues, there's many gaps. It doesn't happen. And that's, I think, partly because of communication injustice. These people are not seen, they're not heard, they're not taken seriously. There's stereotypes, there's ideas that indigenous people are against progress. So even if we say it, there's still many barriers to make it happen. And one of the barriers is also the fact that indigenous knowledge is not taken as scientific knowledge. They say scientific knowledge here, indigenous knowledge here. And what we have to do is find the common ground. Indigenous knowledge is valid knowledge, is important knowledge. Scientific knowledge is also valid knowledge, important knowledge. We have to find a way to make them work together. It's not that the indigenous knowledge is better than scientific knowledge, or that the other is better. It's that we have to integrate them.
Indigenous peoples are also saying that their knowledge is not 100%. There is also scientific knowledge, and then they can complement each other and address the climate change. But lately, I have been following the WACC programs that you are lately supporting the climate change initiative, especially the community radios or indigenous-led media initiative across the globe. So could you tell me about your programs or in partnership with other organizations, how you actually reach out and how you prioritize this climate change initiative and how you are supporting to address this, ongoing climate change?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for us as WACC, it's very important. It's part of one of our core pillars as an organization to work on climate-related issues, and we do or we engage in partnerships through groups like Cultural Survival, APC, which is the Association for Progressive Communications, and other partners that are global. But also we open applications to people from indigenous communities, local communities who can approach WACC with an idea. We don't have a lot of funding, but we have small pockets of funding that we can allocate to different organizations. And what we do is we trust the local communities with the solutions and the project. So we don't think that we know everything. So the local communities come to us and say, hey, there's a situation in Nepal, for example, there's a hydroelectric plant or hydroelectric development, they're taking our land, we need media for this and that, and say, okay, this is good. We provide access to some funding, technical support, and to international visibility. So we try to bring these voices to the UN for a permanent forum on indigenous issues, or to the climate COPs, or to international platforms. So that's the work that we do.
In another background that you were also saying about, there is also international kind of communication movement like WACC or something like that.
WACC, yeah.
So could you just tell us about your engagement with WACC, and do you see there is any participation of indigenous peoples in WACC, this international what is called communication society or something?
Yeah.
So. To what extent do you think that the indigenous community, or broadcasters, communicators in the ground, should be involved in this international communication kind of process or initiative?
Yeah. So it's called the World Summit on the Information Society. This happened 20 years ago, and in 2025 there will be a 20-year review. You know how the UN has so and so plus 5 plus 20. So this is WSIS plus 20. And this is a space to discuss digital developments, digital policy, internet governance. But in our experience, there has been very limited. Well, there's been some civil society participation. We think it's been very superficial, really, and I haven't seen any indigenous voices, any platforms where indigenous voices are seen and heard. And I think we need this.
So another point that, as you said, you use the word about the social media, technologies, this internet technologies and so forth. For indigenous peoples, this internet or social media, this digital platform is far distant stream. If I have to update you in Nepal, the internet data is one of the most expensive data that we use it. Or even if there are many indigenous communities, they do not have access to even the social media or internet, even smartphone. With that context, is there any ways how we can increase the access to that this digital platform for indigenous peoples, or what is your relations working with the partners in other countries? Like you were just sharing me in Indonesia, some of your partners are providing a kind of community internet or so forth. If you could you share that examples so that perhaps the indigenous communities in Nepal or this Asian part can also replicate that idea to increase the access of community to the internet or digital platform?
Yes. So the main problem is that the telecommunication companies have one important objective, and that is to make money. So it's easy for them to provide services in Kathmandu because there's many people, there's a big market, so they can make money. But when you go to rural areas in the mountains, they have less of an incentive to provide the services because there's not enough of a market. There's few people who can pay small amounts of money. So the telecommunication companies don't provide the service. So what we have seen is that often it's grassroots communities, peasant communities, indigenous communities that get together, and in a similar way, like with the community radio movement, they establish community internet networks that are run by themselves they have their own equipment, and so these are interesting models because they're able to provide access, but more important than the access is the control. I think we all have the right to control over the communication that we have, the content that we have, and often it's the private sector, the corporations that decide. So this is important because indigenous people could have a right to say we want internet, we don't want internet. There's communities that are organizing in this way. In Costa Rica, for example, we know communities that say, no, actually we don't want the internet. We want to protect our language or culture, or if we want internet, we want it only from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. That's it. So the idea is that communities can control their own communication as opposed to becoming a merchandise of the telecommunication companies.
Okay, when there is a debate or discussion in regards to internet and indigenous people's access, some indigenous groups, even in Nepal, are making a kind of statement that through internet there has been like e-colonization now.
Mm-hmm.
The internet is now building a kind of narratives to the people, dominant in English. Mm-hmm. So, the internet
mm-hmm.
world
mm-hmm.
is not supporting indigenous languages,
mm-hmm.
so that they are being e-colonized,
mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So, to what extent do you think that, based on your observation, or that, though you shared a little
mm-hmm.
indigenous people's perspective too, so what is your idea or, your own view so far is how to, what you call the meet, these two debates together so that indigenous peoples also feel that they are friendly with the internet, also they also can be a part of this global communication system.
I mean, this is a long debate that is rooted in colonialism, right? Because if you think about the colonial times, the information and everything was controlled by the colonial masters, and ultimately we know that media and communication are power. If you control communication, you control media, you control culture, you control debate, the public debate, the news. So certainly that has been the case in many countries, including Nepal. And content is often not in English. It doesn't reflect the realities of the communities on the ground. So you have all those communities that are watching American movies, and that's fine. So I think that's okay, but we have to find a way to create local content, local stories, local voices, and people have the right, and they can choose what to watch. You can enable people, a diverse media system, but we need to provide the resources for local voices to have their own stories.
Good. I think that maybe, let me share our own stories too. Why we took initiative to launch this community television or community radios, indigenous led one is, indigenous peoples have their own languages, but they don't have access to the information in their own languages. So community television, community radios are the one promoting their languages, preserving their languages, or revitalizing their languages as such, and connecting to this, as you are also involved with this International Decade of Indigenous Languages. Together with communication rights and. To what extent do you think that indigenous community radios or indigenous community television or indigenous-led other broadcasting mechanism can help promote this, indigenous languages, connecting to the international this decade? How important it is?
It's absolutely essential because one of the good things with the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, UNDRIP, is that it refers specifically to indigenous media. I think
Article 16.
Article 16, yeah, it refers specifically to indigenous media. So that's actually a very good thing because it gives indigenous people a legal mechanism to push for this. But yes, it's an essential part of the communication ecosystem that we need to support. And I think we have to be careful about the myth of digital. Nowadays, this idea that with digital communication you can solve every communication problem. But as you said, there's a lot of exclusion still. So we need to continue to invest. We need to continue to work with local communities so that they have a voice.
So a lot of conferences or international conferences that you cited take place in the New York UN headquarters in New York or in Geneva or other parts, even in this WICC. WICC is also taking place in Geneva or somewhere. indigenous communicators or broadcasters taking small initiative in the ground.
Mm-hmm.
But lately, I have heard that WACC is working with other partners, also bring these, communicators
Mm-hmm.
or indigenous broadcasters, journalists to the international forums.
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell that your initiative or your plan to help this community, indigenous broadcasters, communicators, to the international level? How,
Yeah.
to what extent you are helping, or what is your plan in upcoming years?
It's a challenge. For example, I was in New York 3 weeks ago at the Summit of the Future, and so I was there, and we wanted to invite 2 or 3 partners from Kenya, from Costa Rica, and from somewhere else, I forget. The problem was visas. Getting a visa to go to the US is expensive, more than expensive, it takes a long time. So at the end, we only had one organization from Kenya, kicked on it. So it's a major challenge that we're always faced, because the UN says, there's going to be an inclusive space, multi-stakeholderism, but actually getting to New York, or getting to Geneva, or getting to Paris, or getting to wherever, these big cities in the West, is actually quite expensive. So our commitment as WACC is to continue trying. We try to invite organizations to be present. We think it's actually very important from an ethical point of view that these voices are heard. So we might actually we haven't done this. We haven't had this kind of partnership with indigenous television or with the Nepali indigenous radio movement, but we would like to. So whether it's at the next COP or at the next platform internationally, we will try and make this happen, because we think the work you're doing is very important to be seen internationally.
We have come almost at the end of the show. We talked a lot about the communication right, indigenous people's right, connecting to the communication right, and so forth. I don't have any question to ask you, but if you think that you want to eat something, or at last minute, I think if you want to give maybe one-line message to the viewers or indigenous people, communities who are watching, I would like to give you this opportunity to express something at last.
I would like to say that. First of all, I'm very happy to be in Nepal. It's an honor to be in a country with such a strong indigenous rights movement, and I would say that indigenous television and the indigenous movement and the leaders like Jagat and yourself, Dev, are an inspiration to the work that we do at WACC and to many indigenous people around the world. And all I can say is that we admire the work that you do, and we think it's actually impressive. We hope to continue to be in partnership with you for many years.
Thank you, Lorenzo, for joining us on the Dave's Hammer Show and also sharing your insights.
Thank you, Dev, and thanks to everybody here at Indigenous Television.
So with this, we have come to the end of the show. That doesn't mean that the communication continues. Today, if you have any feedbacks or queries related with the programs, you can reach us at indigenoustelevision@gmail.com. Today, I had invited Lorenzo Vargas from Colombia to discuss a lot about the communication rights. So please join us next week. Next week, we'll come up with new episodes to discuss on the new issues and new topics. And by then, have a nice weekend. Namaste.